What kind of a world do we want to live in? This podcast opens the difficult and uncomfortable conversations about crime, addiction, poverty, and more. If we want a healthier community, these messy conversations need to happen. This is Dangerous Ideas for Social Change. Hi, this is Kent Dueck here with Dangerous Ideas for Social Change. I'm excited to have a little session we're calling Hanging With Harvey. And it's the latest, greatest little conversation where we want to pressure test some ideas, and we want to pressure test some decisions that we've made in the last little bit, and just talk through kind of, for our listeners and viewers' interest, kind of what's going on in the community and kind of how that impacts on people. So let's just talk a little bit about a bunch of sort of media attention and concern about us not being able to have that block party, and that's old news, but I kind of wanted to do a deeper dive on the why. So we kind of came to that decision based on kind of balancing out how do we keep our community safe. We had a number of incidents. We had a murder across the street. It's about 50 feet from our front door. We had an individual who was walking around the community with a hammer, naked, attempted to assault some people. And then we had another individual who had broken some windows that week. And we were just kind of in this space where, like, okay, like how do we guarantee the kids on the block safety, and how do we do this event? So I don't know, Harvey, what are some of your thoughts on incidents in the community and what you see going on and the impact of it?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like the last 2 months especially have, there's always things happening in neighborhoods like ours, and it can also somewhat ebb and flow a little bit. But certainly the last 2 months have seen lots of violence. There's been numerous murders. This across the street, there was somebody that was murdered on our street where I live. There was numerous attacks, just random attacks by groups of people stabbing individuals in the space between my house and here.
We had the police conference on their title to the police conference, or the police news conference, was extreme nihilistic youth violence, which I just thought was so interesting. Like, I've never heard a descriptor of nihilist attached to youth violence. But yeah, so lots of sort of announcements and issue and actual incidents of violence. Say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, all of that stuff affects decisions that people make, or the way we had a young man that we're connected with here through our programs, who just last week was attacked on the street basically across the street from our building too. He was just walking, and a person high on meth came and grabbed him around the throat and held a what do you call it? A
utility knife?
Utility knife,
yeah.
To his throat, and tried to actually slice his throat. He was able to thankfully grab the hand, and he cut himself pretty bad, but to stop him from pulling it across the throat. And then the guy ran off to a corner store around the corner and attacked somebody there and was arrested. But it just is, so when that happens to an 18, 17-year-old young man, then it makes, my son we live a few blocks away, and he goes and mows the lawn for people that we know, and then we're like, well, do we want him walking alone? Do we want, our kids walking to the corner store and stuff like that? There's lots of people that still do, but it does make you second guess those kind of things, when, not just when it's one incident or two, but when it's happening regularly, and when it just is more random than ever. I used to always tell people, if they'd be like, oh, how do you live in whatever? I'm like, if you're not involved in gangs and the drug trade, you're not hanging out at all-night drinking parties, chances of things happening aren't that much higher than in other parts of the city. But that certainly has changed now with a lot of the drug epidemic, especially with people that are struggling with meth addictions. Like, I know guys who were hardcore gang members who are like, I don't walk the streets at night no more, because they're like, it's crazy out here. I'm like, you were the guy that people were afraid of 5 years ago. But
I found that, like, years ago, when it was, say, if somebody was intoxicated, you could talk with them normally, and usually you could de-escalate something that might be happening.
For sure.
Because people they still had the reason within them. If you could just sort of help them sort of calm down or whatever. But you're right with some of what I see. I mean, I saw a girl a while back who was literally rolling in puddles, and she was freaking out. She was frothing at the mouth. She was completely catatonic, and I just tried to sit with her just to calm her down. And so, I mean, when you think about, I wasn't aware of that. I had heard about the incident with the young man that we're talking about, whose name we will not name in this moment. But I thought it was just a sort of an event where he was attacked front on. But this could have been, we could have lost him. And this is just for our listeners. This is one of the greatest kids. He's just such a positive force. He's going to be working for us this summer. Such a good kid. I can't even imagine losing this kid. And talk a little bit about kind of how does so this kid is really resilient. I saw him the next day, and he was volunteering to help out around here, and seemed positive and upbeat. But how do you?
But it still messed with him for sure. Like
the trauma. My goodness.
No,
how does that affect kids who face those incidents?
Yeah, I think of a young man that I know who he could never sit still in class. He could never, the teachers of the school actually came and asked me to come connect with him because he was forever just wandering, looking out the windows, looking out, carrying weapons to school and stuff like that. And it's because of things that had happened at his home. His older brothers were gang members, so rivals had, come to the door with guns and were threatening people. And he was a 13, 14-year-old kid and was struggling with PTSD with that kind of stuff. I think the other thing that is just so rampant now is every day you're seeing people passed out, lying in the street and on the sidewalk in the back alley. Many people. I'm actually amazed at how many people stop to check up on people. Sometimes I spot somebody, and before I get to them, somebody else has jumped out of a car or jumped off a bike to check on them, which is really cool to see. But it just is, kids are seeing that walking to school every day, seeing people passed out, seeing people high, seeing people at times, in that paranoia kind of meth psychosis stage. Just this morning on the radio, I heard that, somebody talking about a police officer told him how he had got a call. His last call of the day had been to, I don't know if it was in the D, like Lord Selkirk Housing Development, but somewhere close to Main Street housing, where the kids had called 911 because they were trying to go to school, but they couldn't leave their apartment because there was a bunch of people using right outside, and there was needles and people screaming and fighting right outside their door, and they were afraid to leave their apartment. And it is not something that, it's something that reverberates throughout the community and will have long-lasting effects. And the reality is that many of the people that are struggling, many of the people that are on the streets are themselves there because of, well, I don't know if you can, it's very complex, a whole bunch of different things, but I would dare say that almost every one of them have had their own significant trauma and significant pain, significant losses that they've never had a chance to process in a healthy way. Many of the people that I know, it's one thing when you're driving down Main Street and you just are overwhelmed by the numbers of people that you see. It's overwhelming for everyone. But it's different when you drive by and you see, you don't just think addicts or homeless. You think of Justin or Tamal or Tracy or Lacey or people that you know and have relationships with. You know some of their story. You know their history. You've laughed with them. You've cried with them. And you have some insight into their pain and loss.
The book Firewater talks about kind of the dynamic in addiction where addiction is often driven by some kind of trauma or shame or some kind of pain you're walking with, that the use of a substance sort of kind of dampens or tamps down that pain. But then the actual, once you get caught in it, there's just, it's also a culture of trauma. So, if somebody's on the street using, I've seen people who are, kind of out on a, high and just unconscious, people going through their pockets and robbing them while they're unconscious. And
that's almost kind of like a given. There's many people on the streets, but there's also many, many people that just kind of float around from trap house to trap house, like from apartment blocks or houses where there's drug activity, drugs being sold, drugs being used. And it's kind of a given that once you pass out, once you're, if you've been up for 3 or 4 days and you fall asleep, anything you have of value is going to be, gone through and stolen.
So there's a stacking of trauma. Like the addiction is driven by trauma. Now you're out on the street and you're experiencing more trauma, and that's got to have a snowballing effect. Like it must be very hard then if somebody's just dealing with day-to-day trauma. And you described this individual who's, kind of in a permanent state of hypervigilance in their classroom, like nervous. And so that is kind of a great seedbed for a deepening addiction.
Yeah, I think also so many of the individuals that we have relationships with who are on the streets struggling with hardcore addictions. I had a conversation with a young woman a while ago. She's like, I haven't even begun to process my brother's murder, let alone my mom's death or my dad's death or the 2 other people that she knew who died of overdoses that week, let alone the week before and the week before that. Like it just, that kind of, it compounds the impact of that, and you're just never not suffering under those things. So, and I mean, our society tells us it's no good to feel pain. It's hard to feel pain, so you want to mask it. You want to mask it, whether it's drinking, whether it's drugs, whether it's sex, whether it's shopping, whether it's work,
compulsive
whatever.
Social media use, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Instead of teaching or encouraging people to walk through that pain, and I mean ideally surrounded by a few people who know you and love you and can help see you through to the other side, where you can emerge and still obviously are impacted by that loss, but you're not so devastated that you can't also imagine taking steps forward. So many people, I feel, are trapped or numbed or in that kind of limbo and have never had a chance to, had never had the opportunity in a healthy way to process that stuff. And and one of the things that is frustration is there's nowhere to bring somebody immediately. Like when I get a call late at night from somebody who is at the end of the rope and saying, I have been struggling with this addiction for so long, I can't take it anymore, I'm going to die. Can you take me somewhere right now? And there is nowhere to take somebody. Like you have to do detox first. To do detox, there has to be, a bed. Sometimes it's 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks wait. You have to then get doctors, a doctor kind of checkup to make sure that you're healthy enough to be able to go into detox and all these kind of things. I remember having a conversation with a guy who showed up here who had been brutally assaulted at a shelter and was asking for help. So I took him to to Mount Carmel Clinic and spoke with a nurse there and said, where can I bring him? He's just in such, and he needed more help than just, we were talking with him, I was listening to him, praying with him, but he needed long-term help and support. And she just looked at me with tears in her eyes and just said, there is nowhere to bring him. She says, you can try and bring him to emergency, but it'll probably take hours and hours, and he probably will take off in between. And yeah, that did happen and happens often. It just is, I think there's just a bottleneck between so many people needing supports, and there are a growing number of supports out there, like Bruce Oak Recovery Center, like Recovery Now, and different programs, and AFM and Teen Challenge and all these things. But I just wish there was more opportunities for people when they're in that moment, when they're right. I'm going to tell very quickly, there was a movie in the late 90s or mid 90s called Gridlocked. It was a great movie with Tupac and Tim Roth about these 3 friends who are heroin addicts, and the one overdoses and the other 2 are in a panic. They realize if they don't get help, they are going to also, die. So the movie follows them on a whole day, and it's called Gridlocked because everywhere they turn, we need IDs. Well, they don't have any identification. Well, you need to fill out these forms, and what's your mailing address? Well, we don't have one. And you need to call here, and we will call you back. And well, we don't have a phone. And just all these kind of things. By the end of the movie, they're starting to fiend for their drugs so badly they know that if they don't get help by that night, they're going to go right back to it. So that the movie ends with them standing outside a hospital in the back alley with a big knife, trying to figure out where they can stab each other, that it will be serious enough that they get brought into the hospital and hopefully into treatment, and hopefully directly into some kind of treatment, but where they won't accidentally kill each other, and just that the desperation. Yeah, they're just so many times when people are at that place where they are desperate, there are no options right then. And I think that becomes so discouraging and so hopeless to so many of our friends. And that's a huge thing that stops them from accessing the supports that there are.
Yeah. I wonder, I've been thinking about the concept of addiction fatigue, where like even when I hear you talking, and I'm sure our listeners, as they hear you talking, I mean, it sounds overwhelming, and noticing as well the conversation in our city that so many people are overwhelmed. I keep these newspaper articles on the wall of my office, and I'm trying to sort of track the patterns. But I was predicting this about 2 years ago, that we assume that our helpers will always be fine, and everybody will we'll always have fire paramedic, we'll always have social workers and outreach workers, SABEs, people working in the community. But I've been worried about how we're going to keep this up, and so it feels like we're at a place where it's time to have a new conversation. Somehow it just feels like we need to change the tone, because I'm told that to cast a vision, people have to be convinced that we can no longer remain here. No one will step into something that's a challenge if they're comfortable where they're sitting. It feels like we're all pretty uncomfortable. Like you're as somebody working front line, I know that somebody in the comments is going to ask the question, how do you do this, Harvey? How does your team do this? I mean, there's a group of you, community ministers, that do amazing work in the community, but how do you keep it up? What gives you hope?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something. So I've been here for as a community minister for 20 years now, and it's certainly been it's an ongoing learning process of learning balance, learning healthy boundaries, of learning to develop rhythms that are sustainable. I certainly haven't always done that the best. I am thankful. My wife has often helped me learn how to set some of those boundaries to be able to be sustainable. And having moments of rest and breaks have been huge. It's also been awesome to see hope, to see friends who were struggling. Some are now my coworkers, that were on the streets, that were struggling with addictions, that were involved in the sex trade, or were involved in drug dealing and starting to use and all that stuff like that. And to see it in the lives of others too. So I know that there is hope, but I certainly can relate to feeling overwhelmed. And it is harder to have hope at times it is harder to have hope in a big picture way. You can have hope individually when you see friends taking steps forward, and sometimes, taking steps backwards as well. But I think what is needed, and that's even kind of what you referenced, that article about that youth violence, nihilism, whatever. Without a vision, a people perish, right? So having hope for a future that is not only individualistic, but that is a much larger picture, even rooted in faith, I think that helps us have a different kind of perspective. I agree. I think things have been unraveling for the last 10 years, and this year seems worse than ever in many ways, certainly in our neighborhood, certainly in the amount of people that, whether it's just, at least in the last few years, some of the crazy violence right around literally these few square blocks here seems crazier than ever. I think one of the things that I've been wondering about a little bit is just the notion of harm reduction. And this is where it gets kind of, it can become political and can become divisive. And I have lots of people ask me about harm reduction and kind of where I stand on that, where we think on that. I've been wrestling a little bit with thinking about harm reduction maybe a little bit more holistically, because it's sometimes, I know people very much that are wrestling with, I know friends of mine who are hardcore addicts who are like, it is stupid that they give us all these free needles. They're just helping us kill ourselves. Now, that's one person who told me that. I have numerous friends that have called me from jail in tears, crying with joy that they have been locked up so that they finally can, are basically forced to get clean. And that's not an easy process, especially if they're, addicted to down or fentanyl.
But they're seeing relief in the fact that their life was out of control and now the boundaries are all clear.
Yeah, so that those voices need to be taken into consideration as well. And then also, I pulled up here a couple weeks ago, and this woman who was very high and very unclothed and running around throwing things at cars, and ran into the restaurant across the street and was smashing things or throwing things in there. And that impacts, she is clearly suffering and struggling. And, I've tried to reach out to her a few times. But that impacts, right after the incident happened, a coworker and I went to go check up on the staff to see how they were doing.
Over at
at this
business there.
Little business, and they're struggling, and that is not something customers come to a restaurant for, and for having these things happen over and over and over again.
I spoke with the owner, and she worries that they'll even be able to be viable. She's worried that they'll even be able to stay in business.
From stuff like that.
Yeah, from this incident. When those customers see this naked woman throwing needles at them, they're like, I'm not coming back,
Yeah, and I know. So she is clearly suffering, this woman, and struggling, but that has an impact on people around. This woman who, stripped off her clothes and jumped into the sink in Tim Hortons recently or whatever, and that when you're there with your kids, or when you're there, that kind of stuff, she clearly needs help and support. But I don't know that what is being done right now is also reducing harm for the rest of the community, especially for vulnerable people, for kids, for people that have no options but to take the bus, in the cold in winter, for people that are like these little kids that called 911 because they were trying to get to school and stuff like that.
They're experiencing harm.
Right. The individual who is struggling with addiction and, homelessness, whatever, very much is an individual in need of support and has value. But so do those kids, so do those seniors, so do those people that are needing to take the bus and, are people are smoking meth and there's a cloud around them or whatever on the bus, or I was in KFC and someone was shooting up a needle in their arm, and in the restaurant, it just is, it is, I don't know how, what do we want to be okay with? What do we want to accept?
Yeah. Harvey, I want to pick up on some of these, some of the sort of the views behind it in a future conversation. But I think you've given us a picture of kind of the place we are. And I think of sometimes in planning cycles, there's this thing where it's very important to before you step into like, where do we go from here? It's to have a clear acknowledgement of where are we right now? What is the cultural moment we're in right now? And so I want to thank you for that. One of the things that I've often go back to, based on my 40 years in the community and seeing people change, is that idea that you can never judge a person's future based on their present circumstances. And so that's a good way to sort of hold our friends that are struggling, is that you can look at someone and it can look like impossible, but you have to remember that God can do things in people's lives, and there can be change, and so it's helpful for me to kind of hold on to that, to be hope filled for people that are feeling kind of hopeless. So, Harvey, thank you. We're going to end it there, and I appreciate this conversation and your insights on this issue.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Dangerous Ideas for Social Change.